Reading Adam here with Reading Edge. Today I'm going to change the name of my channel. Reading can give you an edge in life. Speaking of which, that's the purpose of this video. If you noticed the title, my goal for 2020 is to read all of my physical books. So I counted, I have about 300 books that I've not read, that I've been collecting over the years. And my goal, ever since I bought the books, was to read them. Except, I don't know if you're a reader. If you are, I assume you are, because no non-reader would ever watch a channel like this. Um, but what I discovered is I was falling behind on my reading list. So what was happening to me was that I was continuously getting farther and farther behind. I was getting books from the library. I was buying new books, sometimes on my Kindle, sometimes I just go and buy a new physical book and then I would kind of read that. But it was mostly library books and stuff on the internet that I would compulsively buy and then start to read, and then everything else that I already owned became slowly got further and further behind in my list, in my reading list. So what kind of happened is I decided that I was going to try and just get it done. One time it just hit me. I was first. So here's how it happened. Let me try to explain in a decent way. So what happened is uh, I was just spending more and more of my free time on my smartphone, and I was starting to feel overstimulated, exhausted. I was losing my energy. I was losing my desire to kind of just live the way I used to live. I was naturally doing less, and then I decided, you know what, I need to get off my phone. My phone is wasting my life. It's wasting my energy. Everything. It wasn't bringing anything to my life that was positive and beneficial. And then anything positive and beneficial you do kind of consume. It's just another thing that you consume and then it's gone again, and you got to start over, or you got to reinvigorate yourself, or you spend so much energy consuming things that might help you that you don't end up doing anything. You don't take action on anything. So what I decided to do is replace my phone time with reading. Now it's kind of weird, but this is a reading channel. I like to read. But at the same time, I had to kind of rediscover reading for myself. I had to push myself to actually read the things that I have, that I own, that I had been collecting. And I've been, over the years, early on, I would buy tons of books, just everything that seemed even marginally interesting I'd buy. And then as the years progressed, I became more and more stingy and picky about what I chose to read. And I already had to basically be pre-sold on the book. Yeah, and the book had to be non-accessible for free or for dirt cheap on the Kindle. And so I'd go to library sales, I'd go to just used bookstores anytime I had the chance, and I would just go ahead and buy up the stuff that I wanted. I've spent hundreds of dollars over the years on books. I have very many, like I said, I have 300 physical copies. I could easily have double that. I definitely have double that on my Kindle. And then there are other untold amounts of ebooks that are available online that I would have access to. And of course, I've read hundreds and hundreds of library books. So I'm a big time reader, but my own personal library I was falling behind on. So I decided for 2020, I'm going to read all 300 of my books. I'm going to, and I calculated, I figured out, I read depending on, I basically read between 450 words per minute and 900 words per minute. That's my average reading speed. And so I calculated my books. I only have, most of my books are between 200 and 400 pages. Probably a couple dozen of my books are over 400 pages. And Yeah, probably like 40 of my books are over, maybe 50 of them are over 400 pages. And then the rest of my stuff is, I have a couple books that are very, very long. Like for this year, I started already. I started already on reading these because I figured, why not? Just I'm not. I'm not. This is a specific challenge. This is me just reading what I already own and putting a moratorium on buying new books and put a moratorium on borrowing books from the library and buying books on Amazon and stuff. So I'm no longer adding books to my reading list. I am now going to cut down my reading list by a huge chunk in 1 year, at the same time solving my problem of spending too much time on my smartphone. That's the primary focus that I have for this coming year. Because if I could read 300 books in a year, that'll be a fabulous achievement. That would be the most I've ever read in my life. I think the most I had read in my life in 1 year before was about 120, and I could have read maybe 150 because I hit my goals 100 books, and I read 100 by October, and then I just kind of stopped reading altogether. I just read a couple books very, very slowly. So I could have read a lot more, but this year I'm trebling what I read in the past. I'm reading all of my books. I think I can do it because like I said, I calculated the average amount of words I read per minute. I calculated how many words might be involved in all 300 of my books. So I figured out by running these calculations, I kind of figured out, well, I could read all the books if I spend an average of 2.5 hours reading every day, every single day. Now, some days I'm going to read more. Like on weekends, I have more time to read. If I have a day off, I have more time to read. And then so it's not too difficult to achieve 2.5 hours reading time if I get at least an hour of reading time in during work on my breaks and lunch, and maybe a little bit before work, maybe a little bit after work. And then before bed, I can easily squeeze in an hour and a half. So that's about 2.5 hours. This is all still having time to interact with my family, interact with my child, and also do other things, get my workouts in, eat dinner. Like I'm not literally spending every spare second reading. Although that would, if I was a single guy, if I didn't have a family, I could probably do that. And if I wasn't working full time, like I work the kind of full time job where it's 8 hours a week, but it's really 8.5. Sorry, it's 8 hours a day. It's really 8.5 hours a day, and it's really 9.5 hours if you can, if you factor in your commute time. So I'm gone early in the morning, and then by the time I'm home, I've eaten, interact with my child, put my child to bed. It's like 7:30 at night. So it's really like I have a 12-hour day every day at work, which is 56. What is that? 56 hours, 4, 8, yeah, 6, 8. I think no, 54 hours, and so that's the reality of my. I'm spending a lot more time working, 40 hours of solid work, but then an extra 16 hours of maybe an extra 20 hours. Maybe it's really 60 hours that I'm devoting just to work and a little bit of family time before I have an opportunity to read. But I still have enough time. So especially I can go some days without reading as much if I read a lot more on the weekends. And my family knows my goals here. So if I can do this while having a busy work week and while having a family, you can certainly get a lot more reading done. All you have to do is just find something in your life. For me, it was the smartphone. Find one thing in your life that you waste a lot of time on without even realizing how much time you waste. So for me, I could easily spend a half hour on my phone. Like right now, I could easily just exit this video and then just spend half an hour on my phone. Before I know it, half an hour's gone by. I'll have barely felt that half hour. But if I get off this video and I read for half an hour, I will feel that, but I will also make good progress in a book. For instance, right now, I was trying to get some of my very large books out of the way before the new year, just so I could blow through a bunch of smaller books, kind of get myself into a nice groove of just finishing books. So I didn't want to have too many thick 1,000-page books to read packed at the end of next year. That might be a bit demoralizing. So I'm going to kind of chunk the larger books throughout the year. So I read one of my very long biographies on Henry James recently. I'm almost finished now. I only have about 200 pages left of, which is a book in and of itself, right? 200 pages left of a Charles Dickens biography. And I'm really enjoying the fact that I'm actually reading my own books. There's a huge benefit, I think. If you're the kind of person who likes to read, you've got a big collection of books sitting ready to read that you haven't gotten to, because if you're anything like me, you listen to a podcast or you read an article, and then suddenly you hear something referenced by somebody that you follow. They reference this book, and you're like, oh, that sounds really interesting. I just heard somebody just reviewed this book. Let me read that book. And then you're like, let me see if it's at the library. Oh, it is at the library. Oh, well, let me go get that book. And then you start reading that one. And then, of course, if you're at the library, if you're like me, again, if you're at the library, you don't really like checking out just one book. So usually you check out 3 or 4. And then you feel pressed for time because you got to return those. You don't want to renew them. So then you just go ahead and read all of those in one go. And then that puts you farther and farther behind on your own reading list. Your reading list is the books you own. And I've heard it said before, the more you read, the more your reading list grows, and it's definitely true, but that doesn't mean you can't catch up on your reading list. Now, ideally, you read everything you own, and you read a bunch of other stuff, and then you also have time to reread the very best books that you learned the most from. And because the second time around is there's a lot more opportunity to learn, and usually years have passed that second time around, so you've grown, and then your approach to the book will be different than that first time you had read it. So it's if you were a teenager and you read through all of Charles Dickens' books, if you're in your mid-30s or mid-40s or mid-50s or mid-60s and so on, if you then go back and reread Charles Dickens novels, you will see them very differently. Same thing with the Lord of the Rings, stuff that you probably read as a younger person. If you reread as an older person, you will see those books very differently than that first time around. So again, 300 books, 1 year. It sounds like a book a day, but it's not quite a book a day. It's not 30 books a month. It's more like 25, which sounds much more manageable, especially because, a good handful of my books I could probably get through in an afternoon. And so other books are going to take a week, even if I am spending every spare moment reading. So it's not going to be an easy challenge, but what it's going to resolve in my life is my addiction to my smartphone, which was wasting time. It wasn't building anything up in me. I wasn't doing anything useful with it. I was mostly just wasting time. So I'm replacing that time with reading. And of course, other things in life, spending more time. I've noticed ever since I've taken myself off my smartphone, I have noticed that I have a lot more mental and physical energy. So I do think there is something to those constant dopamine hits and being overstimulated, especially for introverts such as myself. I realize that as a deep thinker, as somebody that just anytime I look at something, anytime I read something, I process something, my processing in my brain, it just there's more avenue. It goes through more of the brain than, say, an extrovert. So I'm very inefficient at processing dopamine. So I'd rather be extroverted because you have a lot more energy. An introvert, you need to you can take in a lot of stuff, but then you need to relax. You need to process. You need time to process. So as an introvert, reading a book, actually, it takes long enough where you're processing it as you go. In my experience, this is not scientific or case study, tested, double-blind tested, whatever. But my experience is that reading is slow enough, even if you're speed reading, if you're going as fast as you can, um, reading is a slow enough thing, like watching a movie, where it's happening slow enough where you can process as it goes. Now, movies tend to have more to process, like just the written word on a page. You're not overly stimulated there. But if you're scrolling through on your phone, through social media, through websites, Reddit, Twitter, Drudge, BuzzFeed, all these things, there's too much information. You're constantly bombarded. It's like being bombarded with advertisements all day long in multiple forums that where they've been perfected. They know how to get you. So, and I think the longer you spend on it, the less critically you analyze everything, and the more easily you fall into stuff. I think people who spend too much time on the internet become radicalized and become big-time conspiracy theorists, become big-time political activist-minded people, start seeing other people as objects rather than as people, start developing weird ideas about the world, and the more you unplug, the more relaxed you're going to be, the more genuine you're going to be to yourself, to your family, the people around you, the things that matter, which are the things in your life right now. So 300 books, if I will let you know how it's going through the year. I know I have the time. If anybody's like, well, I got, I'm going to be working out and I have all these other commitments and stuff, fine. Just take that one thing that is a waste of your time and replace it with reading and see what happens. Give it a shot. Give it a chance. Especially if you have a backlog of books that you own that you need to read. You got to read those books. You bought them to read them. Don't be an Umberto Eco who had like 15,000 or 30,000 books that he owned and like 20,000. I'm just pulling this number out of my ass here, but I'm kind of remembering, did he have 30,000? Was it 15,000 or 30,000? I just remember that he had tons and tons of books that he did not read, and it kind of gave it, when he would look over his personal library, it wasn't all the stuff that he did read that he was really thinking about and looking at. It was all the stuff that he did not read that he was thinking about, all the knowledge out there that he doesn't have access to. He doesn't have time. So I'm not saying you got to read 30,000 books. I mean, I don't know if that's even possible for any human being. 300, let's say I could keep up the pace of 300 a year. In 10 years, that's 3,000 books. That's a lot. In 30 years, 9,000 books. So, by the time, 30 years from now, I'm in my mid-60s. And maybe by 70, I could have 10,000 books read. I mean, that's a lot. That's tons of books. But I'd be 70 years old. Most of my life is gone. I'm not going to have 20,000 read after that, even if I spend every moment reading. By then, my eyes will probably be shot. But I want to have everything read by then that I want to read. And it's not as much as you think. So 300, you can easily clear almost all the classics that are a big deal. 300, because you could easily find 300 books just on the French Revolution. You could find 1,000 books on World War II, 1,000 books on the Civil War. There's so many books on so many topics, but you could cover a huge breadth of topics just with 300, and then eventually with 1,000. So it's something that it's not like I chose a big, giant, ambitious number. It's just that happens to be how many books I own that I have not read yet. And I don't want to waste time. I don't want to spend the next 10 years slowly going through them. This year, I checked what I've read, and out of 70 books read, 20 of them were books that I owned. So that was just, maybe a third of the books that I own. A third of the books that I read every year are my own that I read. That's not it's been very helpful for me to just, and it might be helpful for you if you have a lot of books, to say to yourself, I'm going to stop buying new books. I'm going to stop borrowing books. I'm going to just read what I have. Read what you have. There's a reason why you bought those books. You want to read them. You've wanted to read them for years. And the closure you get, the closure that I'm feeling in my mind of like, it's that feeling of I'm finally setting out to do what I've been wanting to do for a long time. So some of these books that I'm reading, I've had for probably 10 years or longer, and I'm just now getting to them. When I buy a new book, in my mind, I'm not thinking, oh, I'm going to read this in 10 years. Who thinks that way? You're in your mind, you're thinking, I'm going to get to this in like the next year or the next month, or something like that. And then before you know it, that book loses its importance and it just slips further and further down the line of stuff that you want to read. Even though initially you really wanted to read that when you saw it, otherwise you would not have bought it. So read what you've bought, count the number, get an idea of how many words are involved in all of those books combined, and then figure out, just Google like reading tests or whatever, and speed reading test. I just Googled that, and then the first website, it had me read a big long paragraph, and it told me how many words per minute I read, and then I read it as I read it at my normal pace, where I'm not trying to read fast, which was about 450 words per minute, and then I read it at the way that I speed read, and then that was 900 words per minute. So I know I can just divide that into the number of total words, and then figure out that in hours, and then I have an idea of how many hours it would take. I divided that by the 52 weeks of the year, and that's how I figured out how much I needed to read on average every day, which was just 2.5 hours. That's really not that big a deal. 2.5 hours. It also kind of maybe demonstrates if that sounds like a lot to you, if that sounds like a lot to me, which sometimes it does. I'm thinking like, man, I only have 2.5 hours really of free time a day, because right now I'm not watching movies, I'm not watching television. Like I said, I'm going to work, I'm coming home, I'm hanging out with my child. She goes to bed, and then I start reading. I'll converse with my wife, but then I'll start reading, and before I know it, it's 9:30, and I'm starting to fall asleep. I've been pushing myself to stay up later, 10:30, and waking up later, and then just very quickly getting ready for work and heading off to work, so I can stay up a little bit later, extend my time in order to hit that 2.5 every day. But it was a little bit depressing figuring out that I didn't have as much free time as I thought, and that's so I might as well use it for something beneficial to me. Now, after I read my 300 books, I was going to go into reading my Kindle books, starting with the ones that I definitely want to read, like the works of Charles Dickens, the works of Henry James, Mark Twain, like stuff like that. Carlyle's History of the French Revolution, the big time books, not the little weird stuff that you find on the Kindle classics, but like the big name classics, Wuthering Heights, Vanity Fair, etc., etc. So I'm going to read those, and then as many of those as I can. Catch up on all of my classics, and catch up on all the books I own. And once I'm caught up with all that, can you imagine the weight taken off my shoulders? Like right now, I have this huge weight of books on my shoulders, where there are hundreds and hundreds of books that I want to read. And knowing me, like I have to read them. I have to. because I enjoy books. That's one of my favorite pastimes. I'm jaded with movies. I've I watched the first, so episode 8, no, episode 7 and 8 of Star Wars I watched in theater. Right now, as I'm recording this, I could very easily go and watch the ninth episode of Star Wars, but I don't care. I don't care. I know there'll be great visual effects, and I've always enjoyed those. But that's not really that kind of eye candy is not. I get maybe I'm just jaded. I'm okay not having watched that. I watched the first episode of the Endgame with Avengers, but the very last movie of the Avengers where it ends, I haven't watched that. It's been a while since it's been out. I've not seen it. So I'm getting whereas the reason I'm bringing it up is because as a kid, as a teenager, as a 20 something, I would have had to see those movies. Like it would be a non-negotiable. I'd go see them, and I'd rent them. Whatever. If I hadn't saw them in theater, I'd rent them as soon as they were out. I just had to see them. I got excited, but now I don't get excited about those movies. I've stopped caring. I don't know if it's just the quality of entertainment has gone down, or if just I've gotten older. Because I don't remember my parents ever wanting to see any of the movies I wanted to see, and not and they don't want to ever since. From the time I was a kid to now, today, this very day, my parents, they don't go to the theater, they don't watch new movies at all, ever. And I don't know if that's just an adult thing, because I find myself more wanting to watch adult movies, not pornography, but adult dramas over the action adventure stuff I used to love as a teenager and young 20s, and thought I would never grow out of. I thought I would always love that stuff, but I don't. I don't care for it anymore. And the more I read, the more, when you read a really good story, really well written book, it's more. I find it more rewarding. And anyway, so right now, that stuff is all in moratorium. It's kind of nice. It's you take a burden from your shoulders. So I want you to do this. I want you to take all the stuff that you waste your time on, movies, video games, social media, extracurricular activities that you actually don't like. I want you to get rid of all of them. Just let them fizzle away. You can go back to them eventually, but just get rid of them for now and spend that extra time doing one thing that you really have been wanting to do for a long time and you've never had the time to do it. I'm telling you, you do have the time to do it. For me, it's reading. For you, it might also be reading, but it might be something else. It might be finally getting down and writing something you want to write. It might be finally starting a business or a project or getting a second job, just to pay off debt, something like that. So there's many things that you can do, that you do have time for. We're just not allocating that time properly. So this is how I'm allocating my time for the new year. I'm already doing it. I've already started, because why wait? And if I don't read the 300 books, if I only read 200, well, hey, that's 200 books of my own that I've read. And every time I pick a book out and I read through it and I put it back on my shelf, seeing it, that I read that. It's an immense sense of closure. And that's really what I want to get at, is there are a lot of, closure is not something that just applies to relationships. It applies to your stuff. Now, when I watched Marie Kondo's Netflix special, she's all about minimalism and, well, maybe not necessarily minimalism, but just organization. And she has the people on the show get rid of a lot of stuff that they just don't use anymore. It doesn't spark joy in them. They don't get anything from it. And tons of people have way more clothes than they need, way more just objects that they don't get any pleasure from. The stuff that's just been stored away, tucked away. And so I've gotten rid of tons of things over the past couple years because I would just look at it and be like, why do I have this still? What is this? I don't even know I have this. And I just throw it out. Like, some stuff donate, some stuff sell, but some stuff I'm just like, I can't, I'm just tossing it. I'm getting rid of it. I'm downsizing. I still have tons of stuff, as you can see behind me. There's tons of things, but that's what happens when you have a family. You know, if I was just by myself, then it'd be completely barren behind me. But, or actually, from floor to ceiling, there'd probably be books everywhere. But there's so much stuff in our lives, and you need to have closure with your things. It'll actually clear up space in your mind, in your physical space, in your memory, in your past. You need to get closure. You should get closure. You need to get closure. I advocate that. That's why I'm doing the 300 books. It was more for saving myself from myself, my cell phone addiction, my smartphone addiction, the internet addiction. I'm saving myself from that by replacing it with reading. B, I'm cutting down the tree of all my books. Like, I'm getting massive closure with reading all the books. I'm sure I'll gain knowledge. I'm not expecting these books to change my life in terms of all the things I'm going to read about and learn. Maybe, but I'm not expecting that, because a lot of the books were chosen when I thought I was going to be a history teacher. I didn't end up being a history teacher. So I've got a lot of histories and biographies to read and classics. And at this point, since I know I'm not going to become a history teacher, I'm not really sure if that's kind of what I want to read in the future. But anyway, that's for another time to figure out where I want to go with my reading. But massive closure is happening. It's relieving a burden. Also, I actually have something to focus on. And this has been something that I haven't had in my life. Like, I finally have a career that I can focus on when I'm at work. But then when I'm at home, I want to focus on other things to expand myself. And I can finally focus on, I have this one goal that's not super easy. Like, it's not like, oh, I'm going to read 20 books next year. No big deal. I'll read that this month. But next year, I have this huge goal that's going to require focus and dedication. So if I can just do that, then that will mean major change in the way I operate, you know? So my next major focus after that, who knows? It doesn't have to be reading. Like, this is a reading channel. I do want to record as many videos as I can going over the best books that I read. But I want to, I don't want to spend the rest of my life just reading. I want to read all the stuff that I want to read, that I feel like I should read or is very interesting to me, and I want to always have a book on the go no matter what. But there are other things that I would like to do in life. I don't want to just always, the only thing I do in my spare time is read. I don't think any of us necessarily want that. But this is a necessary goal for getting my life back on track, so that I know I will have a full year of experience saying to myself, you can do this. When you apply yourself and you're focused and you have an actual target, an actual goal, it works. You get it done, it works. So this is a long video talking about myself and my reading goals, and if you've listened to this, I appreciate it. I hope you got something from it. I'm going to cut it short now because I'm at 34 minutes and I don't want to make it longer. Hopefully, and I usually mention at the beginning of my videos, listen to these at 1.5x speed, 2x speed if you want. I usually don't listen to videos where people are just talking at the regular speed. I try to speed listen if I have the opportunity. So if you're listening to this, oops. All right, have a good day.